So you know how Democrats and the left want to take in as many migrants and as many refugees as humanly possible from as many countries as possible? Well, have you ever noticed that they never talk about taking in migrants and refugees from Venezuela? It's almost like they don't want to talk about Venezuela, and here's why. Because they have to admit why these people are fleeing Venezuela. They'd have to talk about the complete and utter socialist collapse of Venezuela. And they'd have to offer statistics and facts like this, that in the last 2 years, there's been a 30% infant mortality increase, that in the last 5 years, 75% of the people living in Venezuela have lost on average 19 pounds per year, that 90% of people in Venezuela are living in poverty, that manufacturers like Goodyear are pulling their companies out because they can't stand it anymore and the taxes are too high. And they'd have to be honest about the fact that Goodyear, instead of giving people severance pay, gave people 10 tires each because that's now more valuable in Venezuela than money. They'd have to tell you about the fact that in Caracas, instead of funerals, there are now mass cremations because no one can afford funerals. They'd have to tell you that Venezuela is now the murder capital of the world. And they can't tell you any of this because they're trying to input the same failed policies in Venezuela into the US. Because knowledge about what's going on in Venezuela is an inoculation for young people for voting for socialists. It's a full stop on it. Think about this. There was that major Times Guardians of the Truth piece that came out where they were talking about how journalists are risking their lives to report on real stories. But yet there was no discussion of the fact that the last nationally circulated newspaper that is not owned by the Venezuela government closed after 75 years. There was no spotlight shown on that. And the reason why is they don't want any information getting out about it. When the Trump travel ban or Muslim ban came out, it was all the discussion about how he's discriminating against Muslim-based countries. But there was no discussion of Venezuela, which is on that list. And the reason why is they don't want to admit that people can flee from countries because of failed leftist policies like socialism. They don't want to admit that socialism, the thing that Ocasio-Cortez supports and the Democrat Party now supports, is a reason for over 3 million people fleeing from their homes. They can't admit that. Here's the deal. At the end of it, the only way to stop young people from voting for these people is to expose what's really going on in Venezuela. And think about this. If you think the media isn't blacking out what's going on in Venezuela, there was a 5.8 earthquake in Venezuela 10 hours ago. Did you hear about it? Did I hear about it? No, I had to look it up. The reason why is they don't want any light shined on what's going on in Venezuela or its people.